Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Spero, and I'm a partner at Jacobs & Schlesinger. We are a boutique full-service immigration law firm in San Diego. So what that means is boutique, that's just a fancy word for small. We have about 7 attorneys on staff, along with 15 support individuals. We're full service, which means that we cover all aspects of immigration. I primarily focus on our employment-based and our naturalization and family-based team, but we also do court representation, humanitarian petitions, and asylum as well. And we are an immigration firm, which means we focus exclusively on federal U.S. immigration. Since this is a beer podcast and presentation, I thought I would talk about my favorite beer as well, which is currently Fall Brewing's Goo Goo Muck IPA. It's a hazy IPA, it's super citrusy, and it includes a reference to one of my favorite bands, The Cramps. So if you have an opportunity, I highly recommend it for a great fall beer. I also wanted to thank today the team over at Craft Beer Attorneys, specifically Candace Moon and Shannon Lynette, and then also the team of professionals over at Craft Beer Professionals for putting this on today. So what I want to talk about today is ICE enforcement and how to prepare for ICE action in 2025. And I think it's important to know that there are no new laws that are in place, but we do have a fairly significant policy shift towards more enforcement. We're seeing increased I-9 audits, and then accompanying that, we're seeing more raids that are arising from our I-9 audit results. We have increased community presence for immigration enforcement, and that includes going into locations where immigration typically was not, such as schools, hospitals, other types of in-person types of engagements. We're also seeing what I refer to as sort of increased militarization of ICE, and there are some increased violence between bystanders and protesters and ICE officers. And while I'm talking to you today on October 1st of 2025, we are on our first day of a government shutdown, but ICE is considered to be an essential aspect of our federal government. And so these activities are going to continue even through a shutdown. They're considered to be important enough that we fund them and we put focus on them as we move through a period of non-funding. Our agenda today is we're going to go over the Department of Homeland Security and the various entities that might be involved with immigration. We're going to talk about 3 different perspectives, perspectives for employers, for employees, and then also for bystanders and customers. And then we'll have time to answer some questions at the end if there are any. All right, so let's get started. The Department of Homeland Security was created on March 1st of 2003, and it was part of an overall reform of our Homeland Security and our security apparatus that arose from the events of 9/11. The previous administration of immigration law was done by Immigration and Naturalization Service, which was a single entity that was responsible for all aspects. But many of those functions, as well as the functions of other agencies, were consolidated into DHS. So DHS has a very wide purview. They're responsible for all aspects of public safety. That includes anti-terrorism, both domestic terrorism and foreign terrorism, border control, cybersecurity, transportation security, maritime resources. It's quite a big job that DHS is tasked with. Within DHS, there are 3 primary agencies that are tasked with immigration, and all of that used to be under INS, but now it's been broken into 3 separate bodies. The first body is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you generally are not going to run into USCIS officers as part of immigration enforcement because they are the benefits agency. These officers work in the home office or they work in some of our field centers or service centers, and they're responsible for administering non-immigrant benefits, immigrant benefits, U.S. citizenship, and certain types of asylum and refugee applications. So these are generally bureaucrats who are going to be focusing on benefits and not necessarily on enforcement. Enforcement is handled by U.S. Customs and Border Protection and by ICE. CBP is the agency that's responsible for border management and customs management, and they're located really right around where our borders are and some interior checkpoints. CBP officers have uniforms, and those uniforms have changed a little bit over time, but the uniforms are color coded, and it kind of identifies for you what activities that Border Patrol or CBP officer is responsible for. Border Patrol focuses on patrolling waterways and the land, border, and interior checkpoints. And they're going to be either in green or in brown. Green uniforms are used for land, and then brown uniforms are used for air and maritime operations. CBP are customs officers, and they're wearing blue uniforms. They're typically at the ports of entry inspecting goods and people. So if you're coming in through an airport and you're going through customs, you're seeing CBP. If you're coming through San Ysidro Port of Entry here in San Diego, California, you're seeing CBP. And they will also be at some points that are called deferred inspections offices, which are places you can go to talk with CBP without having to make an international trip. You will see CBP out in the community, but they're typically at manned posts or stations. There can be some work that's done around the border, following people into the United States, doing interdictions, but oftentimes they're kind of concentrated around the coastal areas or around the ports of entry that we have along the southern and the northern borders. The agency that is primarily responsible for being out in the community is ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There's several divisions within ICE, but the two that we primarily see are Homeland Security investigations and enforcement and removal operations. And I should apologize for all the acronyms. Immigration loves nothing better than an acronym. So I've tried to put the full names in here, but most of the time I'm just speaking in letters. HSI is responsible for investigations, as is implied by their name. They focus on transnational crime, smuggling, trafficking of people and of drugs, gang activity, and other types of financial and trade crimes. And then enforcement and removal operations, or ERO, are responsible for apprehension, detention, and removal of undocumented immigrants. When you would see these individuals in the community, and you do still sometimes see this now, they typically are wearing some sort of a black t-shirt or a black windbreaker, something that identifies them as police. And then below that, you'll see HSI or ERO. And that was kind of the standard presentation they had when they were out in the community doing investigation or enforcement action. Today, however, as we're sitting here, there are really no standard uniforms for people who are engaged in immigration enforcement. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Primarily, before January of 2025, immigration enforcement was being done by ERO. But now we have many more people from different agencies who are involved in immigration activities. Only about 15% of the staff members who are doing full-time immigration enforcement right now are from ERO. ERO only had about 6,000 officers, and right now we have about 33,000 who are charged with immigration enforcement inside the United States. Nearly all of HSI, which is about 12,000 people, have been redeployed to immigration enforcement rather than investigation work. And then we also have about 10,000 people that have been redeployed from other federal agencies. Those include things like Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, the FBI, individuals from the Bureau of Prisons, and then also individuals from the IRS. So that's one reason why we have kind of a non-standard uniform, because we almost have a non-standard immigration enforcement group. There also is a lot of concern about the safety of officers. We've had reports of attacks on ICE officers, including a shooting in Texas that appeared to be geared towards ICE officers, although they were no one was harmed. They were not harmed in that incident. There were 3 detainees who were shot. We're seeing increased protests at ICE facilities. We're seeing increased protest and presence in the community when ICE is out doing enforcement activities. And the Department of Justice has reported that there's a 1,000% increase in attacks on immigration enforcement. We don't have the raw numbers to know what that means, but there is a big concern about the increased tensions and increased reports of violence related to immigration enforcement. And I don't want to downplay that because it is something that is of concern to everyone who's involved in immigration management, and really it should be to all Americans as well. So you're not going to find people in standard uniforms. Right now, individuals are often wearing plain clothes, but they may have black bulletproof vests or other types of khaki uniforms. Those vests or jackets or patches may say police. They're likely to have masks or neck gaiters, those old ones that we saw from COVID. It is possible for states to pass laws that prevent their own local law enforcement from not wearing masks, but federal officers are not being held to those state law standards. They may be carrying firearms, radios, handcuffs, or other types of things that you would associate with police. They may display a badge or ID. Anybody has the right to ask, but officers often will not identify who they are. And they may be in masked cars because they are not required to have any types of sirens, emergency lights, or insignia. So immigration officers today are often looking like this. It's easy to tell, even if they're not in a full uniform, just because of sort of what they're presenting as. But there are times where there are individuals who are just wearing regular street clothes, like some of the pictures that I put up here. So it's kind of a combination of what the people are doing and where they're located that can help you identify if there's an ICE officer present. So I wanted to start with our first perspective, which is how employers can prepare for ICE encounters. And the first and most important thing you can do is to know what your rights are as an employer. And that's really about what can you do when ICE is coming into your employment space. ICE is able to enter any area that's available to the public without a warrant. If they are coming in to do any type of law enforcement activity, they are still bound by the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment basically says there has to be reasonable suspicion for a law enforcement officer to act in fulfillment of their duties if they don't have a warrant available. There is some ongoing legislation or litigation, I should say, about what that means to have reasonable suspicion. But the Supreme Court has let CBP and ICE and other immigration enforcement officials rely on appearance, race, and language as reasonable suspicion. So we are seeing more reports that people are often being targeted because they're speaking Spanish or because of where they're located outside of a Home Depot or next to a car wash, or because of the clothes that they're wearing, the race that they have. Those reports are coming in more frequently because that type of reasonable suspicion has been tacitly approved by the Supreme Court. Without a warrant, immigration enforcement can search for people without immigration documentation within a reasonable distance from an external boundary of the United States. You may have heard of this before. It's typically referred to as the 100-mile rule, and it's something that we've had in place for a long time. That includes international land borders, but it also includes the entirety of U.S. coastlines, and it can also include within the jurisdiction of an international airport. So most of the country is covered under this reasonable distance rule that allows for that type of lax reasonable suspicion to be enforced. ICE can enter your facility to detain somebody. That could be a person who's in removal proceedings. If that's the case, then they may have either an administrative or a judicial warrant for that specific purpose. But ICE is not limited to only going after somebody when they have a specific target. They're permitted to make what are called collateral arrests. And this was collateral arrests were something that CBP had agreed to not do, but that agreement expired in 2025. A collateral arrest means that if they come to look for Katie Spero and Katie Spero is sitting with John Doe, John Doe can be taken into custody if John Doe does not have the ability to prove lawful immigration status in the U.S. So that's what a collateral arrest means. ICE officers can also enter to prepare for an I-9 audit. That's going to be a very quick in and out procedure. Someone's going to come in, they're going to present a written request for documents, and then they're going to leave. Those documents are either returned on paper or electronically. So if ICE is coming in specific for an audit, they will be there 5 minutes and then they will leave. And then ICE can also enter as part of a workplace raid. They may have a warrant, but it could also be part of an overall business profile when they're doing increased community enforcement. Los Angeles is a very good example of this right now. We're seeing certain types of businesses be targeted on a regular basis. And those areas tend to be construction sites, car washes, certain types of food and beverage facilities. And then we also have seen that across the country. There's a very high profile litigation case that got filed recently about a man who was detained 2 times by ICE at an Alabama construction site. Even though he had presented documents showing that he is in the country lawfully, he had this happen on 2 separate occasions by 2 separate workplace raids. So it's to be expected that we may be seeing more ICE into our spaces. Many times they're going to come in with a specific purpose and they'll have paperwork related to that purpose. But other times they're going to be coming in as sort of larger investigation or enforcement activities. And so it may just be sort of wrong place, wrong time when ICE is coming into your business. I talked about administrative and judicial warrants, and those are 2 very different types of documents, and they carry with them 2 very different types of obligations. An administrative warrant is essentially homework that the agency has assigned itself. It is a formal written document, and it's going to be signed, but it's issued internally by another federal agency. And so it's oftentimes signed by an immigration officer or another ICE agent, and it allows them to make an arrest or a seizure, but it's not the full weight and force of a judicial warrant. It could be signed by an immigration judge, but unlike other types of law, immigration judges are not created by Article 3 of the Constitution. That creates the other type of judges that you're more familiar with. Immigration judges are employees of the Department of Justice, and they sit in specialized administrative courts. And those courts do not have to adhere to federal rules of evidence or other types of federal rules that apply in other court contexts. Importantly, administrative warrants do not authorize a general search or access to non-public areas. It's pretty much, we are coming here to seize this person and these documents. A judicial warrant, on the other hand, is a document that you have to comply with. And if you don't comply with the judicial warrant, there can be significant and serious consequences. Judicial warrants are formal written orders that authorize law enforcement to make an arrest, to make a seizure, or to conduct a search. And those are issued by Article 3 courts. So they have complied with an assessment of probable cause. They've made a presentation to a judge about the evidence that they have. And the judge has then signed an order that is permitting an ICE enforcement activity to occur. So here are some samples of what they look like. Over here on this side, you can see what an administrative warrant looks like. Up at the top, it's going to say warrant, but it's going to have more like check boxes. The signatures are going to be down here, and then you're going to see a form number because all federal forms are issued a form number by the Office of Management and Budget. And then up at the top, you're also going to see a federal agency like the Department of Justice or Department of Homeland Security. Over here on this side is what a judicial warrant looks like. So you can see that it's going to be signed by a U.S. District Court. There's going to be references to the state. There's going to be more formal language. And then it's going to be signed by a specific judge. So these types of documents are fairly standardized. So when you look at them, you can help identify whether this is a warrant that you don't have to allow individuals into private areas, that doesn't allow them to do a lot without your permission, versus a judicial warrant, which allows them to do whatever they would like, whether or not they have your permission or not. There are a few things that I generally recommend for employers to think about and to prepare for as we're moving into 2025. But these really can apply at any time and during any administration. Just because we're seeing increased enforcement right now doesn't mean that enforcement ends under other presidencies or other times in our history and in our future. So one of the first things that you can do is complete an internal audit to make sure that your I-9 documents are fully compliant. The I-9 process was created in 1986 by the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which is also called IRCA, and it applies to everyone inside the United States, including U.S. citizens. So every employee should have an I-9 completed, and there are requirements about when those I-9s are to be due. The first page, which involves the person's individual information, has to be completed before or on the first day of employment. And then the employer needs to verify the identity and work authorization of the employee by the third day of employment. I-9 forms change over time. And so it's okay to have older forms. It's okay to have older documents, but you want to review and correct any existing forms if there is an error that's on them. You also want to pull your payroll records to identify any missing forms. You're not required to keep an I-9 forever, but you are required to keep it for a long time. So every current employee has to have an I-9 on file for them. If you have been employed for under 2 years, once the person leaves employment, then you can schedule their purge date. If it's under 2 years, it's 3 years from the first employment date. And if it's over 2 years, it's 1 year from their last date of employment. There are instructions with the I-9, and there is a practice manual called the M274 that can help you fill out the I-9. I will say the I-9 is a deceitful form. It is a 2-page form with 2 schedules. So we're talking about 4 pages. The manual on how to complete the I-9 is nearly 500 pages. It is a complicated and complex document. So it's easy to make mistakes on it. And a lot of those mistakes are just paperwork violations. You didn't check a box, or you didn't fully complete the information about the document that was presented. But having an I-9 audit and scheduling those on a regular basis, making sure that you have people who are trained to do the I-9s and that you're scheduling purge dates will mean that if you do have an I-9 audit, you're more likely to have a successful outcome, and you're less likely to have a workplace raid that's arising from paperwork discrepancies. You may also want to consider using E-Verify. E-Verify is a federal program that essentially automates the I-9 verification system. If you're just completing paper forms, you're not expected to be a document expert, but you are expected to sort of use your normal common sense and due diligence. So if someone gives you a green card that looks like it is not laminated, that has Comic Sans on it, that is falling apart, you could potentially say, I'm not sure this is a valid document. E-Verify does that process for you. So it is a program that allows you to have the government verify and authorize that documentation. It currently is not mandatory to use it unless you have certain types of federal contracts. But typically, the government has given what's called a safe harbor. It gives you a little bit more leeway with any people who turn out to not have valid documents if you've gone through the E-Verify process. So conducting an internal audit for I-9 compliance, I recommend that to be done at least annually. But if you have not done one in several years, you may want to do one every 6 months until you are sure that your team is up to date and kind of knows what they're doing with those types of documents. I would also recommend that you complete some training for staff about what they're going to do if ICE comes into your business. And there's a few things that you can do. First, you want to designate a rapid response team and a phone tree. This is like when I grew up in Kentucky, we would have tornado warnings and we were part of a phone tree where people would call and say there's a tornado on the way. So this is the same type of thing, a phone tree where you have somebody at the facility every day who is going to be reaching out on a phone list, and then the next person calls down the line. You also want to prepare a written RAID protocol that has specific and simple instructions for the staff to follow. It's going to be a very tense time if law enforcement comes into your facility. And so having things that are very difficult to follow means that you're going to not have them followed. So you want to be able to kind of limit what it is that the people who are at the facility need to do, and potentially put more activity on the people who are in your phone tree. You also want to practice, just like a fire drill. You want to run a mock raid scenario, just so that people are comfortable and have gone through that process before. And then you may want to connect with local immigration networks or with other local businesses. There are many immigration groups who have provided training on staff, or on site for staff, or have done remote trainings for staff. I can make some recommendations based on where you are located, but other businesses are likely facing these same concerns and same worries. And so you could also incorporate them into your rapid response plan, so that you can include other kind of interested parties in helping you navigate that. The RAID protocol should have a couple of different elements. First, you want to assign staff during each shift who are going to be responsible for interacting with ICE. And those people need to be trained on what the protocols are. You also want to make sure that your facility is set up to clearly designate what is private and what is public. And you don't have to use special language, but you do want to have signage. So you can say private, you could say no entrance, staff only, other types of things. Other things that you can do are have doors that are closed or locked to certain areas. Here in our law office, you have to get a key to get in and out, or you have to ring a doorbell. We don't have any spaces that are not private, or they're open to the public. Everything is private. And then you could also have a formal visitor policy in place that limits access to certain areas without permission. Oftentimes that's not going to be immediately available, but if it's part of your handbook or you have it as a separate policy, you could show it to a immigration officer and say, okay, this is an area that we don't allow visitors in without permission, and then we're not granting you permission for X, Y, and Z. Oftentimes those are things like access to where the beer is being brewed, for example, or to certain warehouses. And many times it has to do with safety, not even part of an immigration enforcement consideration. You also want to train all of your workers on what warrants look like, and then have them very specifically know where they can allow ICE to go without a judicial warrant and what's going to be kept private. So they can say things like, you're not allowed to enter. You have to speak with my employer. It doesn't have to be a big argument. It can just be a couple simple sentences. You could also say, this is a private area. Do you have a judicial warrant? It's mostly about remaining calm and then being very direct about what information you're asking for and what you're preventing the individual from doing. Don't run for the exits. It will only make it worse. You do not have to confirm if someone is at work or show them where the worker is if it's only an administrative warrant. If it's a judicial warrant, they're going to do what they want to do that day. And oftentimes when ICE is coming into a place, they will ask people to sort themselves. So they may say, all U.S. citizens stand on the right, or they may say, everybody who's documented stand to the left. You do not need to do that. You don't have to sort yourselves. Your customers don't have to sort yourselves. Your employees don't have to sort themselves. That's not a requirement under any type of warrant. And then you may also want to train your workers on how to tape. We'll be talking about that a little bit more in our section about bystanders in a few minutes. You do have a First Amendment to record police in public, and that does include federal law enforcement and immigration officials, but you're not allowed to obstruct. And sometimes the line between what is filming and what is obstructing can be a little blurry, but if you are told to step back, but you can continue to film. Our next group that we want to focus on are employees. And so what we can do to support our employees who are going to be encountering ICE. And oftentimes that, again, is just starting with the very basics. What rights do you have when you have federal law enforcement come and ask you about your lawful immigration status? Federal law allows for the deportation and removal of anyone who does not have lawful immigration status. And so that can be a couple of different groups of people. It can be people who entered without inspection or without permission. So we have designated ports of entry along our land ports of entry, our land borders, and along our seas. But if you're coming across the border in an undocumented fashion or an evasive fashion, you don't have a lawful status inside the United States. It can also be people who are what are referred to as I-94 card overstay or visa overstay. And the word visa refers to a very specific document. It's part of your passport that allows you to come into the United States. So for example, a tourist visa that's valid for 10 years. It can also be what's called ESTA, which means coming in for 90 days without a visa. And we have certain countries that we have agreements with that allow their citizens to come into the US for short periods of time. Your visa does not dictate how long you're allowed to be here. A visa is only a permission slip to enter the country. When you enter the US as a non-green card holder or non-US citizen, you receive a document called an I-94 card. And up until 2013, you knew you were getting an I-94 card because you had to fill one out. When you were on the plane, you got a little I-94 card packet, or if you came to the port of entry, you filled one out there. But that process has been automated and turned into an electronic process since 2013. So many people don't even realize that they are receiving these documents at entry, but they are your status document. It says when you came in, what status you had, which is basically what permissions you have to do certain activities in the US, and when you have to leave. And so if you overstay that period, then you are moving into a period of unlawful status, and you can be taken into custody and deported after that time. And then there are other groups who can kind of trigger a non-lawful immigration status because of activity. Green card holders, people who entered the country as refugees or who entered and then were granted asylum, and certain types of non-immigrants who commit crimes can be moved over into an undocumented non-lawful status because of those activities. The calculations for what crimes count are fairly complicated and complex. I teach immigration law at one of our local law schools, and I spend 2 classes going over what these certain crimes are, so we won't go through those today in 5 minutes. It's not every crime, but it's going to be kind of the big things that you think about. So if you don't have a lawful immigration status in this country, even if you haven't committed any other crimes or violations, you can be taken into custody and you could be deported. And depending on how you entered, you may or may not be eligible to be seen by a judge or be eligible for bond, which is essentially immigration bail, while you have your court proceedings going on. If ICE stops you in public or while you're at work, you have your basic Fifth Amendment rights in place. So that's the right to remain silent, the right to ask if you're being detained or if you're free to go, and then you have your Fourth Amendment right to deny any type of search. I do not recommend that you run away. It will make things worse. You do have a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. So you can say, I want to remain silent, or I don't want to talk without my attorney. You definitely want to ask, am I free to go or am I being detained? And if you are free to go, then you can leave then. And if you are in the country lawfully, you can comply with the request. I have been stopped and asked to prove my U.S. citizenship, and so I've shown my passport. My husband has been stopped and asked to prove his U.S. citizenship, and he's shown a passport card. So it's something that even native-born U.S. citizens can do on a regular basis. I do recommend that everyone, including U.S. citizens, be carrying some proof of their documentation. It's not a requirement for U.S. citizens, but it is a requirement for non-immigrants and immigrants, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Again, because you are in public, ICE can come and talk to you without having anything more than a reasonable suspicion. And that reasonable suspicion could be that you're speaking Spanish or a foreign language. It could be the clothing that you're wearing. It could be your race or appearance. And so ICE is stopping and having these sort of casual encounters with much larger groups of people in 2025 than in other years. If ICE comes to your home, now you're coming into a private area. And so you have, kind of more rights that are assessed to you. You continue to have all of your Fifth Amendment rights, right to remain silent, right to say, am I free to go? You have right to counsel. You can continue to say, I'd like to speak with my attorney. But most importantly, do not open the door. I have a firm policy that I do not open the door for any law enforcement, regardless of what they're showing me, even if that's a judicial warrant. If they have a judicial warrant, they will break the door down. They will come in. Nothing will stop them. But if they are not taking that step, that means they don't have the right to. So you do not have to open the door, and you can refuse it even with a judicial warrant. I rent, so if they shut down my door, it's not my door. But if you feel differently, you can also ask to see the warrant, have them hold it up or slip it under. But do not open it even just a tiny bit to look at the warrant, because then that is an invitation for them to come in. I also recommend that if you are in the country lawfully, you can show them your documents, but don't hand your documents over through a mail slot or through other mechanisms. And you can call the police if something's going on. Recently, there is an unverified report that ICE officers had an individual came home and he had his 5-year-old daughter in the car. He was concerned that ICE was following him. And so he went into his house immediately, and ICE officers held the 5-year-old outside and said, if you want to come and get your daughter, you need to come outside of your house. That is what the individual is alleging happened. In that specific case, they did call the police and call 911. And local Massachusetts police came over and reunited the 5-year-old with her family. So if things are getting very heated and very hectic, you can call 911 and ask for law enforcement to come. But you have a lot of rights when you're within your home about stopping people from coming in. You do need to carry your documents, however, if you are not a U.S. citizen, and that even includes to green card holders. So in 1940, we passed the Alien Registration Act, and that requires all foreign nationals to register with the federal government, provide biographic details, and carry proof of registration. Even though we passed this act in 1940, it has largely not been enforced. When we did pass it in the 1940s, to register, you went down to your local police or your local post office spot, you filled out some paperwork, and then you left. And then we enforced it for a small group of people following 9/11. But this is a larger enforcement that includes basically anybody in the country who's not here as a U.S. citizen. The reason that this has been revived in 2025 is due to an executive order that was signed by President Trump that's called Protecting the American People Against Invasion. So it clarifies who is subject to registration. It creates an online form that can be used to register if you're not currently registered. And it also mandates that you have to carry proof of your registration. So for green card holders, that means you need to carry your green card. And I mean your original green card, not a copy of your green card. I know that that is very scary, but if you don't carry a copy of your green card, it is a federal misdemeanor, and it includes punishments of $100 or up to 30 days in jail. It is something that we are seeing for the first time be enforced. I've never had green card holders get citations for this, but we're starting to see them now. If you're a non-immigrant, you want to carry your I-94 card or the non-immigrant visa in your passport. I recommend the I-94 card because it is an automated process. You can get a new I-94 card very easily from the internet, and it's just a piece of paper you need to cut down and keep in your wallet or your purse. If you have deferred action for childhood arrival or DACA, you want to carry your work permit or proof of your deferred action grant. And if you have a pending case, so there are people who are in this sort of gray area where one benefit has expired, but they haven't received the new benefit yet, you want to carry proof of that filing receipt. The Alien Registration Act is being enforced, and so it's something to keep in mind. But if you're looking at this presentation in 2026 or 2027, the Alien Registration Act might be something that is no longer on the books because it was really invoked in this most recent time by the executive order that's cited here. So how can you prepare for an ICE enforcement if you're an individual or if you're worried about your employees? The first thing is have them know their rights and their options. So you want to, distribute Know Your Rights cards. You can find dozens of them for free on the internet. One of the most popular ones is called the Red Card. It's put out by the ACLU. It's called the Red Card because it's red. But you can print them out in any color or in no color from the internet for free. It's a helpful card to have because you can also just pull it out and look at it and refer to it if something's happening. You want to make sure that you're carrying your U.S. documents or your documents that show U.S. status, not necessarily the documents of your country of origin. So if you're a U.S. citizen, carry a birth certificate. If you're a Brazilian citizen, you should be carrying a different type of document than your Brazilian birth certificate. It's just not going to help you if ICE is there and wanting you to document your status. You may want to carry the telephone number of someone who knows your plans and can assist with next steps. They will take your phone, and so it has to be a phone number that you have memorized, or it can be something that's in your wallet because you can't ask to get things out of your wallet. You want to practice exercising your rights. Practice saying things like, am I being detained? Do I have the right to an attorney? Things like that. And you may want to either request your records or review any records you have by meeting with an immigration lawyer or a nonprofit agency. Even if you don't have any options, there is always a lot of people in immigration who are going to tell you that you do because they are not good actors. I don't hear of a lot of people pretending to be bankruptcy attorneys or pretending to be insurance defenders, but a lot of people prey upon immigrant communities because of the vulnerabilities that are inherent within those groups. So have a trusted immigration attorney. You can get referrals from your local bar associations. Don't just look at the internet. Talk to people who've had good experiences. Look for vetted individuals. And then many nonprofits exist, both with legal aid, Catholic charities, Jewish and family services, other similar groups that have immigration units that you can meet with. And if you meet certain income, they will take a look at your case for free. If you are undocumented or if you're worried, even if you're documented and you're worried, make a plan. Think about the things that you're going to need if you are going to be detained. So what are you going to do for childcare? Are you taking any types of medications? Do you have your passport? Who are your emergency contacts? Can people access your bank accounts? Where are other types of important documents? How are your bills going to get paid? Those are all things that you would want to kind of have in place. Many people have a plan for what happens when they die. And this is kind of similar, a plan for what happens if you get detained so that people are going to know what your wishes are and can kind of help you navigate what it's going to look like if you're in detention and not able to be bonded out. The final group that we have are bystanders. And bystanders are kind of the great unknown. These are people who are going to be in your business, probably customers, possibly intoxicated customers who may be there when ICE comes in. And those are the people that you cannot train about how to act. You cannot have a plan in advance about what individuals are going to be doing, but there are still some things that you can prepare for. So the biggest thing that I always recommend is focus on de-escalation. And this can be whether or not you're supportive of the ICE officers and their mission or whether you are not supportive. There's no kind of political message that I think that anybody should have. Certainly immigration enforcement is very important to our national security, and even people in our immigration lawyer spaces can be very supportive of ICE enforcement. Many people, however, are not. And so the biggest thing is to kind of de-escalate the situation if there are people who are getting upset. There's a lot of different kind of 5 Ds of bystander intervention, or the 3 Ds. I focus on the 3 Ds, which are direct, delegate, and document. Direct is giving directions. It's saying something. And so this is basically the person who is in charge in your rapid response plan, standing up with their mom voice or their dad voice and telling everybody in the room what's going to happen. So they can say, we've got this under control, guys. Let the officers do their job. Please just stay in your seats. Please just comply. Or you can start to direct to the individuals that are being detained. You don't necessarily have to talk to the officers, but you can say things to the people that are being detained. You can say things like, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer that question, depending on how you want to encounter it. Most importantly, you want to keep actions away from the officers. You don't want people shouting at them. You don't want people to be getting into, kind of heated exchanges. So whatever you're going to say, it has to be firm, it has to be short, and it has to be clear. And you need to make it obvious in your tone and your presentation that there are no debates and there are no arguments. So like I said, you need to use your mom or your dad voice. Even if you're not a mom or a dad, we've all been yelled at, and you need to bring that same energy when you're wanting to direct a group of people to do something. The next thing you want to do is delegate. You want to call in some reinforcements. So that could be the employer, another employee or a manager of the business that's there that day. So you can have one person trying to keep the crowd calm while someone else is dealing with ICE. If you're by yourself, is there a regular that you can ask for help for? Can you have somebody go next door, or can you have somebody call someone? So sometimes other bystanders will be looking to help you rather than escalate the situation. And within your judgment, you can kind of take advantage of that. If you're in an area that you're really concerned about having raids, so that might be in Los Angeles or Chicago or Portland, places where we know that there's increased activity, you may want to reach out to faith leader coalitions or immigrant rapid response networks, and they may have directions about if you have a raid, you can call us and we will send someone out. Here in San Diego, our faith leaders have been very involved in going to courts and doing observations, and they do so in a way that has been very calming and has led to a lot of community support and has very much de-escalated those encounters with ICE. And then immigrant rapid response networks typically are just there to document. They aren't going to get as involved as some people might worry about, but they can just be there to sort of, keep the situation under control and try to focus on, having ICE come in, do what they're going to do, and then leave as soon as possible. And then I do recommend that you document, but you record responsibly. So you want to openly announce that you are recording, and you want to narrate your actions. You have the right to record. It's a First Amendment right. And there are some comments that have come out from the Attorney General or from other individuals in immigration enforcement that have said that you don't have the right to film. That is not correct. You want to focus on capturing key details. So faces, badges, timestamps, locations. So you're wanting to document what's happening by focusing on the actors, not about the scene around you. And then most importantly, protect yourself. Do not obstruct. You want to make sure that you're in a public area when you're filming. You want to stay at a safe distance. And if the officer tells you to stand back, stand back. Stand back as far as possible. Any type of obstruction can mean that you are also detained. There are more detentions of bystanders that are happening, and oftentimes that's resulting in criminal charges being pressed. Those criminal charges are often not making it through the grand jury system, but you're still going to hire a lawyer. You're still going to spend a night in jail. As my father always said, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? I vote for happy. So, if you are going to document, and I do recommend you do so, know how to do it, practice how to do it. And overall, if you're documenting, then you can tell people in the crowd that they don't need to document as well. And that will also often de-escalate the situation. I've put my contact information up here. Again, my name is Katie Spero. My formal name is Kathleen, but that's only if I'm in trouble. You have my contact information. And again, my firm name is Jacobson Schlesinger, and we're located in San Diego, California. I want to thank everybody for their interest in this topic and for participating today. And then if anyone does have any questions, I'm happy to handle them.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this session, we'd love to see you in real life. We host in-person workshops across the country for craft beer professionals just like you that are held in some of the most exciting beer destinations around. These grow and connect with others. You'll meet peers from across the country and leave with actionable strategies for success. Connection has never been more important, and you can learn more at cbpconnects.com. Cheers. See you there.